Tonight on the docket, it's Entitlement Week here on the Fox Business Network. It's the battle between the makers and the takers, and who prevails will determine whether America remains the land of opportunity or becomes a European-style welfare state. 1 in 7 Americans collects food stamps. Half of Americans pay no federal income tax. Half of Americans live in a household where at least one member receives some form of a benefit from the government. And the politicians, they know that getting something for nothing buys them votes. They know they can borrow today and stick tomorrow's generation with the bill. It's a brave few who have the courage to stand up and say no. No more borrowing, cutting spending, because you cannot spend what you can't borrow. That's what the debate is all about over the debt ceiling. Next week, the House of Representatives will hold a vote on whether or not to raise the debt ceiling. This vote will draw a line in the sand for lawmakers. Will they stand with the makers or with the takers? And what incentive do they have to rein in this mess? Here now, someone who has vowed to vote against raising the debt ceiling. Idaho Republican Congressman and defender of the Constitution, Raul Labrador. Congressman Labrador, it's a pleasure. Welcome to Freedom Watch.
It's great to be back on your show.
Thank you. What do you think is going to happen ultimately with the debt ceiling? Do members of Congress see the world as you and I do? We simply can't pay back the loans we already owe. How can we in good conscience take out more loans? Or do they see it as, this will keep me in power, this will keep me in office, some future generation will pay this money that we'll spend today?
I think I'm seeing a lot of the freshmen and a lot of the members of Congress that are excited about doing something right with this debt ceiling vote. I think many of us have said that we're not going to vote for a debt ceiling increase unless there's major spending reforms and major changes to the way we do business here in Washington. And I think I have seen a large number of us that are saying that they're going to vote no, and they're a firm no right now unless we see major spending reforms.
What kind of spending reforms? Strike that. What would it take for you, one of the most ardent defenders of not spending money that you don't have, to vote for the debt ceiling increase?
I would have to see significant reductions now in the 2012 budget. I would have to see major spending reforms going forward, and I would have to see a balanced budget amendment passed in both houses of Congress before I even consider to increase the debt ceiling.
All right, well, that's probably not going to happen. I mean, it does require 2/3 of each house to pass an amendment. Then you send it on to the states, and 3/4 of the states have to vote to enact it. Put aside the 3/4 of the states, because you know that would take a couple of years. But even that initial vote in the Congress is probably not going to happen.
Well, and I think it should. I think this is the great time for us to actually have something like this happen. In 1982, Ronald Reagan was talking about actually having a balanced budget amendment. He said that back then, both houses of Congress were reticent to actually pass a constitutional amendment to have a balanced budget. And his words were that if we could do it at that time, we would see major changes immediately. And now we're looking at many, many years later, and we still have both houses of Congress unwilling to do it.
All right, if this balanced budget amendment miraculously were to pass, would there still be some way for presidents to do things off budget? I mean, George W. Bush funded the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan outside the budget. Every time he needed a few $100 billion here and a few $100 billion there, the Congress gave it to him, and it didn't show up in the ledger sheets. However, it was borrowed money, and now we have to repay it.
That was a failure of the Congress to actually do its job. Our job is to make sure that we have the power of the purse, and we haven't been doing that. We shouldn't have been allowing the president to do that, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat.
Should cuts come from all around? Should they cut FEMA? Should they cut Social Security? Should they cut Medicare? Should they cut the Department of Defense?
If Republicans are going to be serious about balancing the budget, cuts have to come from every single area of government. And I think that's one of my biggest disappointments since I've been here in Washington, D.C. All of a sudden, we're saying that we're willing to cut some programs that are important to the Democrats, but we're unwilling and unable to cut the programs that are important to the Republicans. I think if we're going to have any kind of credibility nationwide, and if we're going to win 2012, we have to show the American people that we're serious about having no sacred cows, and all things should be on the table.
Earlier today, Congressman Labrador, one of your colleagues offered an amendment to FEMA's budget, which would give it another $1 billion. pointing to the catastrophe in Missouri. Our hearts go out to those people in Missouri. They suffered a tragedy that none of us would want any of our friends or relatives to suffer. But should the government go out and borrow $1 billion from the Chinese and spend it in Missouri and then have generations as yet unborn be saddled with the obligation to pay that $1 billion back?
Absolutely not. I think that's irresponsible. I think if you look at the FEMA budget, if you look at the people that are working there, we could actually do the same job that we need to do and take care of the people in all these different areas without increasing the budget. You also have agencies that are local that can take care of these issues. We have the Red Cross. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of volunteers that are going out to those areas that are devastated right now. We don't need to keep increasing and borrowing the money so we can help people. I think that's irresponsible of us here in Washington.
What do you think the Senate will do with Medicare? I mean, Congressman Ryan's proposals, the blueprint for which has already been passed by the House, basically says those not yet on Medicare, not those receiving it, but those not yet on it, those under 55 years of age, will be given the opportunity to have a voucher rather than have the government pay their bills directly. Will the Senate even consider that seriously as a step in the right direction against an entitlement obligation that we know we cannot afford if it's not changed?
No, the Senate Democrats, what they're going to do is they're going to demagogue the issue. They're going to talk about spending cuts. They're going to talk about us trying to take people off of Medicare. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to save a system that we have. We know that in the next 10 to 15 years, the system's going to go bankrupt. And the Democrats in the Senate and some of the people even in the House, even some Republicans, are saying that we shouldn't do anything about it, that we should leave it for future generations. And that's the problem here in Washington, D.C. Everyone's willing to kick the can down the road, and I think it's time. The American people are looking for leadership right now. They're looking for men and women that are willing to stand up and speak to them the truth. Let them know that we shouldn't be following the polls. Actually, Paul Ryan said it very well this weekend.
Right.
We should be leading the polls. We should be the ones who are actually encouraging people to understand what needs to happen.
Congressman Raul Labrador sticking to his guns. Don't change. Stay the way you are. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
There's what's being called a clean